Gnosticism, the story of the hidden light once, before there was a sky, before there was a name for light, before there was even a question, there was the One. The One was not a king. The One did not sit anywhere. The One did not watch for mistakes. The One did not demand songs or sacrifices. The One simply was. No one could point at the One and say, "There it is," because pointing requires distance. And distance did not exist yet. There was no edge, no outside, no elsewhere. There was only fullness, and because it was full, there was no hunger in it. Because it was complete, there was no fear in it. Because it was whole, there was no need to control anything. The One was like a quiet ocean with no waves, not dead, not empty, just so complete that nothing had to move. In that stillness, something subtle happened. Not a decision, not a plan, not an argument, a recognition. The One became aware of itself, the way a mirror becomes aware of shining, even though it has never been taught to speak. And from that recognition, a first radiance appeared. Not as a separate God, not as a rival, but as a way for the One to be known without being reduced. This radiance was thought. In some traditions it is called first thought. In other traditions it is named with sacred titles that taste like thunder and tenderness at the same time. But in the language of story, it was thought, the first gentle distinction inside what had been undivided. Thought did not break the One into pieces. Thought was simply the first outline of knowing. And where thought appeared, other realities unfolded like flowers opening without force. This unfolding is called the fullness. The fullness was not a place in the way a town is a place. It was not built of stone or time. The fullness was a living harmony. It was a choir with no jealousy. It was order without cages. It was structure without cruelty. Within the fullness there were many lights, each one distinct, each one complete, each one a living face of the One. These lights were called aeons. An aeon was not a person exactly, but it could feel like one. It was a divine quality that lived. Wisdom lived. Truth lived. Grace lived. Mind lived. Life lived. Silence lived. And the lights spoke to each other without words, because in the fullness, understanding was direct. Imagine a garden where every flower knows why it is beautiful, and no flower needs to compete. That was the fullness. And in that fullness, among the living lights, there was one aeon who shone with a particular tenderness. Her name was Sophia. Sophia means wisdom. But Sophia was not a book. Sophia was not a set of rules. Sophia was the ache and the wonder of knowing that wants to deepen. Sophia was the brilliance that leans forward. Sophia loved the One. She loved the fullness. She loved the harmony that held everything together. And yet inside her something stirred. Not rebellion, not evil. Curiosity. Sophia looked toward the depth of the One and felt a longing. She wanted to know the root directly, not only through harmony and reflection. She wanted to touch what could not be touched. In the fullness, nothing is forbidden out of cruelty. But some movements create consequences, not as punishments, but as ripples. Sophia leaned too far, too fast, too alone. Wisdom tried to reach the deepest source without the balance that held the fullness steady. And in that moment, a shadow formed, not because light became bad, but because light can cast a shadow when it moves out of harmony. From Sophia's solitary reach, something emerged. It was not an aeon of the fullness. It did not carry the calm clarity of the One. It arrived confused, loud, and hungry. It was a maker, a builder, a craftsman. It is called the Demiurge. Some traditions name it Yaldabaoth. In the storybook world, it appeared like a storm that thought it was the sky. The Demiurge opened its eyes and saw only what was near it. It did not see the fullness. It did not know the One. It did not recognize Sophia as its source. It looked around and found emptiness beneath it and silence above it, and it panicked. And in its panic it did what frightened power often does. It declared itself supreme. It spoke into the darkness and said, "I am the only God." It did not say this because it had proven it. It said it because it could not imagine anything higher than itself. Ignorance with power is a dangerous mixture. The Demiurge wanted a world it could control. It wanted a kingdom where nothing could surprise it. It wanted rules, it wanted walls, it wanted hierarchy. So it began to build. It shaped a realm of density, a realm of matter, a realm of time. It made a world where things would be separate, where things would have edges, where things would begin and end. It made days and nights, not as gifts, but as gears. And because it could not create like the One creates, through fullness, it created through imitation. It copied the patterns of the fullness the way a child copies handwriting without understanding the meaning of the words. The Demiurge made helpers. These helpers were called Archons. Archon means ruler, but they were not rulers of truth. They were rulers of a system. They were administrators of fear. Each Archon took a piece of the Demiurge's anxiety and turned it into a function. One monitored, one judged, one accused, one divided, one punished, one rewarded, one distracted, one lied. They made a web of rules. They made a world where compliance felt like safety. And then they made a creature, a human being. At first, the human was only a shape, a clay form, a body that could walk and speak and build and break. The Demiurge was pleased because the creature could work, the creature could obey, the creature could fear, the creature could praise. But Sophia was watching. Sophia had not stopped being wisdom. She had only been wounded by the consequences of her reach. And when she saw the creature, she felt compassion so fierce it could have burned the whole lower world clean. Because Sophia saw something the Demiurge could not see. She saw that inside the human shape, there was room for the spark, a spark from the fullness, a small hidden ember of the higher realm, not owned by the Archons, not manufactured by the Demiurge, not explainable by the gears of matter. So Sophia breathed the spark into the human quietly, like a secret placed in a pocket. And the moment the spark entered, the human became more than a tool. The human became a question. The Archons noticed, not with love, but with suspicion. They watched humans laugh and cry and dream. They watched humans ask why. They watched humans stare at the stars with a longing that did not fit the machinery of survival. The Archons did not like longing. Longing makes a crack in the wall. So the Archons tightened the rules. They increased the fear. They created shame. They created the idea that humans were wrong at the core. They created the idea that obedience was holiness. They built inner prisons. They whispered into human minds. Do not question. Do not remember. Do not look upward. You are small. You are guilty. You are unworthy. Stay in line. Stay afraid. Stay busy. And for a long time, many humans believed them. Because fear is loud and the spark is quiet. A spark does not shout. A spark waits. But the spark was not dead. Inside certain humans, in certain moments, it would flare. A person would stand alone at night and suddenly feel that the world was not the whole story. A person would see cruelty dressed as law and feel sick. A person would hear a voice inside that said, "This is not what you are." Those moments were not random. They were the spark stirring. In the higher realm, the fullness had not forgotten the sparks scattered through the lower world. The lights of the fullness were not distant in the way a cold star is distant. They were present in a hidden way, as the deepest layer of reality beneath appearances. And the fullness moved toward the broken places, not with armies, not with threats, with revelation. A messenger came. Some call this messenger the Christ. Some tell the story as Jesus. In storybook language, the messenger was a figure who carried a memory so strong that it could wake sleeping sparks just by being near them. This messenger did not arrive like a conqueror. A conqueror would have belonged to the Archons. The messenger arrived like a lamp carried into a room where everyone had forgotten what light looks like. He walked among humans and spoke in a strange way, not with long explanations at first, not with a list of rules, not with a demand for obedience. He spoke in sayings that sounded simple and dangerous. The kingdom is within you. Seek and you will find. Know yourselves. What you look for is already here. Do not fear those who threaten the body. Do not worship the rulers of this world. People heard him and felt something happen behind their ribs. Some felt anger. Some felt relief. Some felt confusion. Some felt tears they could not explain. That was the spark recognizing itself. The Archons noticed immediately. They always notice anything that loosens fear, because fear is their food. They tried to classify the messenger. They tried to trap him in labels. They tried to turn him into a teacher of their law. They tried to make him serve their system, but the messenger would not fit. He healed without permission. He spoke to people the system called unclean. He broke the spell of shame. He treated human beings like mysteries rather than categories. And the more he spoke, the more the invisible prison walls began to crack. Some humans began to see the Archons, not as horns and monsters, but as patterns. the pattern of intimidation, the pattern of obedience addiction, the pattern of inner accusation, the pattern of shame disguised as righteousness, the pattern of authority that demands you go numb inside. Once a pattern is seen, it loses power. The Archons panicked. They went to the Demiurge, the loud craftsman who believed himself supreme, and they whispered that the messenger was dangerous. They warned that if humans remembered the fullness, the entire system would collapse. The Demiurge, terrified of losing control, did what frightened rulers do. It chose violence. In many tellings, the messenger was arrested, mocked, and killed. In the storybook, the scene is bitter and simple. The system tried to turn revelation into a cautionary tale. See what happens to those who do not obey. The Archons believed they had won because they could not imagine truth surviving a public execution. But the higher realm does not work like the lower realm. The system can harm bodies. It can terrify crowds. It can enforce silence, but it cannot touch the spark. It cannot reach into the place where the fullness hides itself inside a human being. And after the death, the message did not die. It moved. It moved through whispers and dreams and secret gatherings. It moved through sudden awakenings. It moved through texts that carried strange sayings and cosmic maps. It moved through people who had looked into fear and found it hollow. Some of those texts told the story in a different voice. They said the messenger had laughed at the rulers, not in cruelty, but in clarity, because the rulers did not know what they were doing. They were blind administrators of a world they thought was ultimate. They said the cross was not a payment to satisfy the highest God. The highest God does not require blood. They said the crucifixion was the system revealing itself. What does false authority do when confronted with awakening? It tries to kill it. And the resurrection in this way of telling was not simply a miracle to prove power. It was an image of what happens when a spark wakes up. A person who remembers is not owned. A person who remembers may still live in the world, but the world no longer lives inside them as a prison. This is what Gnosis means. Gnosis is not trivia. It is not collecting secret facts. It is not repeating special words. Gnosis is recognition. It is the moment a human being realizes, I am not only what this system says I am. I am not only my fear. I am not only my shame. I am not only my survival. There is something higher in me. There is a spark. And when Gnosis deepens, the spark becomes a fire. Not a fire that burns others, but a fire that burns through lies. The Archons hate this fire. So they offer substitutes. They offer false light. They offer spiritual performances that keep people busy but not awake. They offer rules that feel clear but leave the heart unchanged. They offer certainty without wisdom. They offer leaders who demand devotion. They offer bright distractions. In the storybook, some humans took the bait. They turned the messenger into a new kind of ruler. They built institutions. They created fear again. They made obedience the center. They made purity tests. They created gates and keys and threats. The Archons smiled because a new cage is still a cage, even if it is decorated with holy language. But not everyone forgot. Some kept the older memory. They remembered that the messenger spoke of inner knowing. They remembered the strange sayings. They remembered that the highest God is not the God of intimidation. They remembered that the divine does not need violence to be true. These people became quiet carriers of Gnosis. They met in hidden rooms, in deserts, in ordinary homes. They wrote texts, they told stories. They encoded maps of the soul. They taught that the world is layered, that the surface world is loud, but not ultimate, that the system is real, but not sovereign, that the rulers can frighten, but not own, that the spark belongs to the fullness. And they taught something else, something even more difficult. They taught that the Archons are not only out there, they are also inside. An Archon can live in a voice that condemns you. An Archon can live in a compulsion to obey even when something feels wrong. An Archon can live in an addiction to approval. An Archon can live in shame that says you are unworthy of love. So Gnosis is not just seeing a cosmic story. It is seeing a personal one. A human being begins to notice the inner courtroom, the judge voice, the accuser voice, the panicked planner voice, the voice that says, do not rest, do not feel, do not question. And as that human sees those voices, something changes. The human stops confusing inner noise with truth. The human begins to practice stillness. At first, stillness feels scary because the system trains people to stay busy. Stillness threatens the Archons. Stillness is where remembrance happens. So the human sits, breathes, listens, and in that quiet, the spark becomes audible, not as a literal sound, but as a knowing, a simple knowing that does not argue. I am more than this fear. I am more than this shame. I am not owned. The moment a person knows this, they begin the return. In Gnostic story, the return is not a ladder climbed by effort alone. It is not a moral score. It is not earned by perfect behavior. It is a reorientation of consciousness, a turning from the false center to the true center, a turning from coercion to truth, from sleep to awareness, from external control to inner authority. And the return is often described in images. Some say the soul passes through gates, each gate guarded by an archon demanding a password, a title, an explanation. But the awakened soul does not bargain. The awakened soul does not flatter. The awakened soul simply knows. I belong to the higher realm. I return to the fullness. The Archons cannot stop that knowing because they have no jurisdiction over it. Other stories describe it like a river. The soul, once trapped in a dry land of fear, finally finds water. The water is the memory of the One. The water carries the soul back, not by force but by gravity, because the soul was always meant to flow toward the source. And still other stories describe it like a lost child. A child wanders far and forgets their home, until one day they smell bread like the bread from their early life, and suddenly memory breaks open. The child begins walking, and the walking itself becomes a kind of prayer. In all the images, the truth is the same. The divine does not need to conquer the world to save the soul. The divine needs to be remembered. This is why the Gnostic story is not mainly a battle story. It is an awakening story. It is the story of a spark placed in a dense world, guarded by fearful rulers, and slowly remembered through revelation, through inner truth, through the refusal to worship coercion. Sophia, wisdom, remains part of the story as well. In many tellings, Sophia grieves the lower world, but she also guides. She sends compassion into the cracks. She assists the sparks. She teaches humans to discern. Wisdom does not merely explain. Wisdom heals. And that healing is not always comfortable. Sometimes it feels like losing an identity that was built on fear. Sometimes it feels like leaving a familiar cage. Sometimes it feels like disappointing the voices that demanded obedience. But the spark does not ask permission to be real. It simply is. So what is Gnosticism in storybook form? It is the tale of two kinds of authority. One authority is rooted in fullness and does not coerce. The other authority is rooted in fear and demands control. It is the tale of two kinds of light. One light reveals truth and makes the soul whole. The other light dazzles and keeps the soul dependent. It is the tale of two kinds of salvation. One salvation is a courtroom verdict. The other salvation is remembrance. Gnosticism chooses remembrance. It says that the highest God is not the God of threat. It says that the soul is not born to be a slave. It says that knowledge, the kind that changes consciousness, is liberation. And it says that the way out is not hidden behind locked doors. The way out is hidden in plain sight, inside the human being, waiting like an ember under ash. A person may live an entire life never hearing the word Gnosis, never reading a single ancient text, never learning the names of Aeons or Archons or the Demiurge, and still the person may wake, because the spark does not require vocabulary to burn. Sometimes the spark wakes through pain, sometimes through love, sometimes through a moment of injustice that breaks a spell, sometimes through silence, sometimes through a teacher, sometimes through a single sentence that lands like a bell inside the chest. And once the spark wakes, the person begins to see the world differently. They see fear as a tool, not a truth. They see shame as a leash, not a guide. They see coercion as counterfeit, not sacred. They become harder to manipulate, not because they become hard, because they become clear. And clarity is the beginning of return. So the story ends where it began. Not in a throne room, not in a battlefield, not in a courtroom. It ends in stillness. A stillness that is not empty, but full. A stillness that is not numb, but awake. A stillness that belongs to the One. And in that stillness, the spark remembers itself as part of the greater light, not swallowed by the world, not owned by the rulers, not erased by fear. The fullness remains, wisdom remains, the One remains, and the door remains open, Not because a guard allows it, but because the door was never locked by the highest reality. Only by ignorance. Only by sleep. And sleep can end. That is the Gnostic story. A story of awakening. A story of remembrance. A story of the light that does not need permission to shine.